Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Let me tell you about this one time that I met someone through online dating. It's a tale that taught me so much about expectations and reality. I met Julie on an online dating website. Her profile picture stood out. She looked incredible. She was captivating with her bright and joyful smile, and she had an aura that seemed to shine even through the screen. Naturally, I was intrigued. We started chatting, and I discovered that she was witty and charming. We had a lot of back and forth banter, and the conversations flowed smoothly, as if we had known each other forever. One day, she mentioned that she was unbeatable at Scrabble, a game that I fancied myself quite good at. That piqued my interest even more. And after a couple of weeks of chatting online, Julie and I decided to meet. I was excited but a little bit nervous. Would the chemistry we had online translate to real life? I don't know, but I was excited for it. On the day that we agreed to meet, I drove over to her place. It was a trailer park on the outskirts of town. I felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As I knocked on her door, I took a deep breath, and Julie opened it. And I quickly realized that she looked quite different from her profile picture. She was much heavier than I had imagined. And she also looked unkempt, like she hasn't showered for days. My immediate reaction was surprise, which I tried to cover, reminding myself that everyone deserves kindness and respect. After all, looks aren't everything. Though I was a bit taken aback by the hygiene. Julie greeted me warmly, and I could tell that she was genuinely happy to see me. As I stepped inside, I noticed how cluttered the space was. There wasn't anywhere for me to sit comfortably, which made things a bit awkward right off the bat. The trailer was filled with books, papers, and a strange collection of knickknacks. It did seem cozy in a way, but also overwhelming, as if every corner had a story to tell. We tried to make small talk, but it felt different than our online chats. There was a slight tension, perhaps the result of the mismatch between our online personas and the reality. Eventually, I suggested that we play Scrabble, hoping that it would ease the awkwardness. She seemed genuinely excited about it, and we set up the game on a small coffee table. The first game started, and I was surprised by how competitive Julie was. She was good, no doubt about it, but I happened to win by a small margin. She was a gracious loser, laughing it off, and insisted that we do another round. And as we played, I noticed more about her concentration, her love for words, and the little quirks that made her unique. The second game was even more intense, but I managed to win again. I could see disappointment flicker in her eyes, even if she tried to hide it with a smile. And at that moment, I was actually feeling good about this meeting. Julie was nice and fun. If anything, I had found a new friend. I also felt bad for judging her at the beginning. We played a couple more rounds and had fun. When we were done, I gathered the tiles to put them away, and I sensed a shift in her mood. Julie became quiet, and the air filled with an awkward silence. Feeling that it was time to leave, I thanked her for the games and then I stood up. But just as I reached the door, Julie started crying. And I mean, bawling. Tears were spilling down her cheeks, and then she was on her knees and she was begging me to stay longer, and then even suggested that we sleep together. That really caught me off guard. I gently declined, trying my best to be kind and understanding. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with that, and that it was important for us to feel safe and at ease and respected. But Julie didn't relent. Her tears continued, and she was bawling and screaming. I wish I could do something more to help her feel better, but I was feeling uncomfortable at this point. So I just opened the door, walked out, and closed it. As I left, driving back home, I couldn't help but think back about the whole experience. It was a roller coaster of emotions. When I got home, I checked my phone and I saw that there were a lot of messages from Julie. It ranged from getting angry to desperation to going back to being friendly and asking me for another game next time. I couldn't help but think that she was a bit unstable, and I don't think I'm the best person to handle people like that, so I just blocked her and then moved on. I genuinely believe that Julie is a nice woman, but that she needs some help in some way. And I also hope that she got the help that she needed. Back when I was single, I worked a night shift at a popular fast food place. It was one of those nights where everything was slow. I had finished all the closing tasks and I was just hanging around, waiting for the rare customer to wander in. To pass the time, I was swiping through Tinder on my phone from my spot in the drive-thru area. While swiping, I came across a profile of a girl who seemed pretty cute. Her name was Sarah. Her bio caught my attention because it started with a cheesy joke, and she mentioned how much she loved koalas, which I found a bit unusual. When we matched, I couldn't resist starting the conversation with, "Why koalas?" She replied with a laughing emoji saying, "Well, they're cute and a little dumb, like me." Her humor was right up my alley. We chatted back and forth on the app, nothing too deep, just some enjoyable small talk. Sarah asked me what I did for work, and I told her that I was a student during the day and I worked at that fast food place at night. There were so many around town that I didn't think twice about mentioning it. After we chatted for a while, Sarah had to go, but asked if we could meet up after my shift. I was pretty excited, but then I realized that I had been working in the back of a fast food joint all night, plus I had classes the next morning. I suggested Friday night instead since I had the day off. She agreed, and everything seemed set. A couple of hours later, as my shift was nearing its end, a car pulled into the drive-thru and I did my usual spiel. "Welcome, how can I help you?" The voice on the other end said, "Hi, I'm looking for Daniel." My heart skipped a beat. Why would someone be looking for me at work? I hesitated, but I responded, Okay, I'm Daniel. How can I help you?" The person replied with relief and then said, "Finally!" As the car pulled up, I was stunned. It was Sarah, the girl that I matched with on Tinder just a few hours ago. I gave her a smile, completely confused and unsure of how to react. "Oh, hi, how are you?" I managed to say, trying to keep things light despite my surprise. "I'm good now. This is the fifth of this chain I've been to just to look for you," she said with a smile that was more unsettling than friendly. It was like she was thrilled to have finally tracked me down, and that made me uneasy. She then added, "So, do you want to go get drinks now?" I blinked, trying to process what was happening. I was still at work, clearly in my uniform, and she had been on a mini adventure around town just trying to find me. I looked at her, then down at my uniform, trying to convey with my eyes that this was not the time or place. Sarah's smile didn't waver as she stared at me expectantly, and after a few awkward moments, my manager, who had been watching from a distance, came over. He gently tapped my shoulder and then motioned for me to step aside. And I did. I was grateful for the intervention. He addressed Sarah, asking how he could assist her. She explained everything, repeating how she had been searching for me that evening. My manager, ever the professional, politely asked her to leave, reminding her that I was at work. But Sarah didn't take it well. She started yelling at him, causing a scene, and eventually she drove off, leaving both of us stunned. After Sarah left, my manager told me he had seen how uncomfortable I looked from across the restaurant and felt that he needed to step in. I thanked him, admitting that Sarah's behavior was strange and a bit scary, and he agreed. After my shift ended, I checked Tinder to see if Sarah had left any messages. She hadn't, but I noticed that she had blocked me. I guess she got the hint. It was probably the weirdest thing that I have ever experienced from online dating, and thankfully, I didn't hear from her again. The next few days, I was on edge though. I was expecting her to show up unexpectedly and then cause a scene, but she didn't. Sometimes, I wonder about Sarah and what made her go to such lengths to find me. Was she just overly enthusiastic, or was there something more to it? I will probably never know. I'm choosing not to share personal details about myself here. Given the nature of this story, it's best if I remain anonymous. But I believe that it's important to share what happened as a warning, a reminder for other women to stay vigilant and protect themselves. But just for context, I'm a female. Growing up, my life was anything but a fairy tale. I was born into chaos, with parents who were more interested in their next fix than parenting. They were deeply entangled in drugs, consistently choosing substances over stability. My older brother, who I once hoped would be my protector, joined a gang and vanished into a world that glorified violence and crime. Home was not really a refuge for me. It was a place of danger and unpredictability. And from a young age, I have faced more than one assault. I wish I could say that I fought back, but at that time, I had neither the strength nor the resources to defend myself. I was a child, alone and scared, without friends or family to turn to for comfort and mostly for protection. My experiences left me wary of the world, instilling a fear that followed me into adulthood. But despite the grim reality of my upbringing, I was determined to escape that life. I found solace in books, losing myself in the stories where protagonists overcame adversity. I was so inspired by their lives. I know they weren't real, but I mean, who else would I look up to? I studied hard, pushing myself academically in hopes of creating a different future for me. My focus and determination paid off though, when I earned a scholarship to a university far from the chaos of my home. I had to go. I just had to. This was my one chance to make my future better. It wasn't easy. I had to balance work and school, and it was tough. But it became my new normal. I juggled classes during the day, and I worked in the evenings, sometimes pulling late-night shifts to make ends meet. It wasn't easy, but it was so much worth it for the promise of a better life. And slowly, I began to build a life for myself. Fast forward to now, and things have really improved. I'm not rich by any means, of course, but I can afford my rent, ensure that I have enough to eat 3 times a day, and I've even managed to budget for therapy, which has been crucial in processing my past, and learning to trust again. And therapy has helped me a lot and helped me unpack years of my trauma. One thing that I did take away from my past, though, is the importance of self-protection. So I carry 2 cans of pepper spray in my bag at all times, one readily accessible, and another one tucked away just in case. I've also taken some self-defense classes, learning techniques to protect myself if the need arises. I've also become adept at assessing my surroundings, always aware of escape routes and potential dangers. With therapy's help and my own resilience, I gradually started feeling more confident in myself, and this newfound confidence led me to consider dating. I downloaded a dating app. I was cautiously optimistic, but I was fully aware of the risk. I do apologize for the long background. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood my part. Anyway, I was on the app, swiping through the profiles, and it became a sort of a game, a mix of hope and skepticism guiding my choices. I chatted with a few guys, but nothing and no one seemed to click to me. Well, that was until I started talking to Francis. His profile was intriguing, showcasing a mix of humor and intelligence that drew me in. He was tall, dark, and handsome, as the saying goes. But more importantly, he seemed genuine and polite. Our conversations were engaging, was filled with laughter and shared interest. And after a week of chatting, we decided to meet in person. I was excited but cautious, so I chose a public place for our first date. We settled on seeing a movie, a neutral setting where I felt relatively safe. I also insisted that we meet there separately. I didn't want to reveal where I lived just yet. Francis turned out to be as handsome as his photo suggested. In the theater, we exchanged polite smiles and then settled into our seats. But as the movie began, I noticed something odd. Francis wasn't watching the film. Instead, he was staring at me intensely. At first, I brushed it off, blushing even, thinking maybe he was just really interested in me. But as the movie continued, his gaze became more unsettling. It was as if he was studying me and not the movie. By the time the credits rolled, I had made up my mind I wouldn't be seeing him again. There was no second date for this. But I wanted to end the date respectfully, so I agreed when he offered to walk me to my car. We had parked a bit further out since the lot was full earlier. It was late, the last showing of the night, and the parking lot was nearly empty. And as we walked, Francis asked if I wanted to come back to his place. I politely declined, mentioning that I had to be up early for work, which wasn't exactly a lie. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. His tone shifted from inviting to insistent, and then to pleading. Anxiety started to bubble up inside me. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I kept a firm grip on my bag, fingers wrapped around the can of pepper spray inside it. The night was still and unnervingly quiet, adding to the tension. Francis' demeanor changed abruptly, his voice rising with frustration as he demanded that I come home with him. Fear surged through me, a familiar yet unwelcome sensation. I quickened my pace, trying to keep the growing panic at bay, but before I could reach my car, he grabbed my arm, pulling me back with surprising force. The world narrowed down to that moment, the threat looming large in my mind. My survival instincts kicked in, and without hesitating, I raised the pepper spray and I unleashed it. Of course, the effect was immediate. Francis let go, screaming as the spray hit his face, and I saw him stumble down. I didn't want to see what happened next, so I slipped out of his grasp, rushed to my car, and locked the doors behind me. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking as I started the engine, adrenaline propelling me to safety. And once I was home, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I showered, trying to wash away the fear and tension. Then I changed into comfortable clothes. In the safety of my room, I blocked Francis on every platform, erasing our connection. I know some might wonder why I didn't call the police, and that is very understandable. But my history with them isn't really positive. Growing up, they failed me repeatedly. I learned the hard way that sometimes you have to help yourself because no one else will. Francis hasn't appeared in my life since that night, and I hope that it stays that way. Sharing the story is difficult, but if it serves as a warning to be cautious, then it's worth sharing. Trust your instincts and protect yourself. In this unpredictable world, being cautious and prepared can be your greatest defense. I had been chatting with a guy named Leo on a dating app called OkCupid. He seemed genuinely nice, with a quirky hipster vibe that I found appealing. He had the typical hipster look, big clear glasses, and a penchant for vintage clothing. He lived about 2 hours away from me, but we had been getting along well online, so he decided to drive down for a visit. I was open to it, curious to see where things might lead. When Leo arrived, though, he looked nothing like his photos. In his profile, he claimed to be 5'7" and thin. In reality, he was around 5'3", a bit pudgy, and his teeth were quite crooked. It was a little surprising, but I reminded myself not to be too shallow. I wanted to give him a fair chance, because everyone deserves that. Leo brought a bottle of wine with him. I'm not much of a drinker, but it was a nice gesture. We went out to lunch at a cozy cafe nearby, and the conversation flowed easily enough. He was charming and funny, and despite the initial shock of our mismatched expectations, I was okay with him. After lunch, we headed back to my apartment to hang out. I poured us each a glass of wine, and I just sipped mine. But Leo finished the whole bottle before 4 p.m. As the afternoon sun filtered through my windows, he suddenly leaned in, asking if we could make out. I hesitated, but I decided to give it a try. After all, chemistry can sometimes surprise you. However, it didn't work for me. We kissed for a minute, but I felt no spark. Gently, I pulled away, trying to handle it kindly. Leo seemed a bit disappointed, but we shifted back to chatting casually, hoping that the awkwardness would pass. As the afternoon wore on, Leo began complaining that he was tired and a little drunk. I told him that he could crash on my couch if he needed to rest before driving back. He then asked if he could sleep in my bed instead. I was taken aback by this, but I told him that it was fine and that I would take the couch. This didn't seem to sit well with him, and out of nowhere, Leo started raising his voice, clearly upset. He insisted that he wanted to sleep in my bed with me for him not to be alone. His emotions escalated quickly, and before I knew it, he was throwing a fit, yelling, and storming out of my apartment. I was shocked and I was worried. He seemed too drunk to drive, and I tried to convince him to stay, but he was determined to leave. As he slammed the door behind him, I felt a mix of concern and also relief. I hoped that he'd make it home safely, but I also knew that I couldn't continue any kind of relationship with this guy after this. Later, I found out Leo got home safely, but we didn't speak after that day, and I felt a bit unsettled about how the entire meeting had gone. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message on the app. It was from Leo. He was apologizing for his behavior. He explained that he had been dealing with some personal issues, and he acknowledged that he had acted inappropriately. He didn't ask for a second chance, just wanted to express his regret. His message gave me some sort of closure. I thanked him for reaching out, and I wished him the best. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I went through a rough patch with dating not too long ago. Things were pretty terrible after breaking up with my fiancée. I found out that she had been cheating on me for the last 6 months of our relationship, which really crushed me. So I was in no shape for anything serious after that. I just wanted to explore a bit, maybe make a friend or two. I decided to give online dating a shot. I made a profile and I matched with a few women that I found interesting and attractive. The experience was mixed. Some women seemed to like me, while others weren't as interested. That's just how it goes sometimes. But one woman, let's call her Lisa, seemed nice at first. She was a nurse and pretty busy, which was perfect for me given my own busy schedule as a lawyer. I wasn't looking for someone who might become too clingy. Lisa and I started messaging each other. We were exchanging pictures and even had a few phone calls. She had a really nice voice, which I liked. I never told Lisa where I worked, but she somehow figured it out. I work as a lawyer at a local law firm. One day, out of the blue, she showed up at my workplace. This was unexpected because we hadn't even gone on a date or met in person yet. Seeing her there wasn't a pleasant surprise. I went outside to talk to her, remaining polite even though I was uncomfortable. I asked her not to come to my workplace again, explaining that it was inappropriate. She agreed that it probably wasn't the best idea, and everything seemed alright. But her behavior had put me off, and I decided that I didn't want to continue communicating with her. And later that day, I messaged Lisa to tell her that I didn't want to talk anymore. In hindsight, maybe I should have just ghosted her, but I thought being upfront was better. I then removed her and I blocked her from my contacts. The next day, when I got to the office, the security guard came up to me. He mentioned that my friend was back again, waiting outside the company property. I turned to look, and there she was, just standing and staring. I told the security guard that I didn't want to see her, and I asked him to keep her away, and he agreed to handle it. I thought that would be the end of it. But I started noticing Lisa around more often. She seemed to hang out around the places that I frequented. At first, it was unsettling, but eventually, I managed to put her out of my mind. I started seeing someone new, a woman who genuinely made me smile. We hit it off well and decided to start dating. Things were going great between us. Then one day, my girlfriend called me. She sounded so upset. She asked if I was cheating on her, which took me by surprise. I assured her that I wasn't, and she said that someone named Lisa had messaged her on Facebook, claiming that we were together. So I had to explain to my girlfriend about the whole situation. She believed me, and then she told Lisa to back off. But Lisa didn't stop there. She kept trying to contact my girlfriend, creating unnecessary stress. It took a few months of harassment before Lisa finally disappeared from our lives. I don't know why she stopped or how, and honestly, I don't care. I'm just relieved that she's out of the picture. The whole experience was a roller coaster. It's a story that I often share with friends to remind them how unpredictable and sometimes scary online dating can be. I had been trying out online dating for a while, just hoping to meet new people. It wasn't always easy, but occasionally I would find some interesting enough to meet in person. That's how I ended up planning a walk with Tom at my favorite park. We had been messaging for a couple of weeks and he seemed nice, maybe a bit quirky, but who isn't in their own way, right? The day was sunny and perfect for a walk, and I was looking forward to it, hoping for an enjoyable chat, even if there wasn't any romantic connection. Tom arrived right on time, and initially, he seemed really normal. We greeted each other, and I pushed aside the typical first meeting nerves. As we began walking, I noticed that Tom was more eccentric than expected. He had this intense look in his eyes, like he was always thinking about something deep. At first, we talked about the weather and the park, just small talk really. But then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Tom started telling me that he had special abilities. He claimed that he was a psychic and had magical powers. I chuckled, thinking he was joking, but as he went on, it was clear that he was serious. He passionately talked about his supposed powers, like sensing things about people just by being near them. I nodded politely, but inside, I was feeling like maybe Tom was a bit too out there for me. The more he talked, the stranger his claims got. He talked about seeing auras and predicting events with such certainty that I wasn't sure how to react. I just let him talk while I tried to steer the conversation back to normal topics. The park, usually my place to relax, felt different with Tom's odd stories. The sunlight through the trees and chirping birds seemed distant as I focused on the path ahead, wondering how much longer I'd have to pretend to be interested. And after about an hour, it was time to end the walk. I was ready to leave. But then Tom asked if I could give him a lift to the bus station. He didn't drive himself to the park, which surprised me, but I agreed, although feeling a bit uneasy about more time together. The drive was short, just 5 minutes, but it felt longer than that. We talked about random things, music, movies, and normal stuff while I drove him. I mean, where were these topics earlier? But then, Tom suddenly said that he needed a bathroom. The bus station was nearby, so I told him that we were almost there. As I pulled up to the station, Tom looked uncomfortable. But then out of nowhere, he wet his pants right there in the car. I was so shocked and disgusted, I didn't even know what to say. He mumbled an apology, grabbed his things, and then quickly got out. And once he was gone, I drove away. I was trying to process what just happened. Of course, I had my car cleaned. It's just that it was one of the weirdest experiences that I've had from online dating. When I told my friends later, they laughed at how bizarre it all was. But I also felt a bit of sympathy for Tom. Maybe he truly believed in his abilities. Or maybe he was just trying to be different in a world where everyone wants to stand out. When I first met Brad on an online dating app, everything seemed perfect. I had been single for a while, and I was looking for companionship. Just someone to share my free time with, to laugh and explore life together. And Brad appeared to be that person. His profile was filled with interests that mirrored mine, from hiking to trying out new recipes in the kitchen. He was handsome too. He had an easy smile that showed in the photos, and our conversations flowed effortlessly, like we had known each other for years. We chatted for a few weeks before finally deciding to meet in person. When he suggested that we meet at a small cafe downtown. I felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. I remember that day clearly. The sun was shining, the streets were bustling with people going about their weekend routines, and I felt a sense of optimism that had been absent for some time. Brad was even more charming in person. He carried himself with a laid-back confidence. Our conversation over coffee was filled with laughter and shared stories about our lives. He told me that he was a freelance photographer, which explained his flexible schedule and his ability to travel often for work. I admired his adventurous spirit, feeling a tinge of envy for his freedom to chase sunsets and capture the world through his lens. Our first date was followed by many others, and we clicked in a way that made me feel like I had found someone so special. Brad was attentive, always texting good morning and staying up late into the night just to chat with me. He made me feel important, cherished even. And it wasn't long before we started spending most weekends together, just exploring the city and venturing into the countryside for scenic hikes. After a couple of months, Brad began hinting at wanting to take our relationship to the next level. He mentioned how much he loved spending time with me, how he felt more at home in my apartment than anywhere else. It was flattering, that level of affection and comfort. But then one day, after a long hike and a picnic by the lake, he dropped the bombshell. He wanted to move in with me. At first, I was taken aback. We had only been dating for a few months, and while things were going well, moving in felt like a big step. I liked my space. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and recharge. But Brad was persuasive. He made it sound so romantic, the idea of waking up together every day, sharing meals, and building a life as partners. It was tempting, and in a moment of optimism, I agreed. He moved in quickly, almost too quickly, with just a couple of bags and his camera gear. I remember thinking that it was odd how little he brought with him. But he explained it away, saying that he liked to travel light and that his work didn't require much. At first, everything seemed to go well. It was nice to have him around, to share my space with someone who seemed to care genuinely about me. But soon, little things started to nag at me. Brad seemed to always be at home, claiming his freelance work allowed him to edit photos on his laptop all day. He rarely mentioned new photography jobs or clients, which struck me as strange given how passionate he had initially seemed about his career. When I asked about his work, he would brush it off, saying it was all under control and moving smoothly. As weeks turned into months, I started noticing other things. Brad avoided any conversations about his family or past, quickly changing the topic whenever I asked about it. He didn't seem to have many personal belongings or memorabilia, nothing to indicate a life that he lived before we met. And then, there was his phone. It never rang, and messages were scarce, almost like he didn't want anyone to know where he was. My unease grew, but I pushed it aside, not wanting to ruin a good thing with my paranoia. After all, here was a man who seemed to adore me, who was attentive and caring. Maybe I was overthinking, letting my imagination run wild. But despite my attempts to rationalize, the feeling in my gut persisted. Things took a darker turn one evening when I returned home from work earlier than usual. As I walked through the door, I noticed Brad hurriedly closing his laptop, looking startled to see me. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. My heart skipped a beat, and alarm bells were ringing softly in the back of my mind. Curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Brad than he was letting on. And that night, while he slept, I did something that I had never imagined doing to anyone that I had cared about. I checked his phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages, finding nothing but a few exchanges with an unknown number discussing mundane things like meeting up and vague mention of financial troubles. So, there was nothing bad, I guess. But the following days were filled with tension. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was wrestling with growing doubts and a creeping sense of dread. I needed answers, some clarity about who Brad really was and what he was hiding. One afternoon, when Brad was out running errands, I decided to search the apartment. I felt guilty invading his privacy like this, but the need to know outweighed my hesitation. At first, I found nothing of note, just his clothes, camera gear, and a few toiletries. But tucked away at the back of the closet that I let him use, just behind a pile of winter coats, I found a shoebox. Inside were various IDs, each with Brad's photo but different names. My mind raced, piecing together a chilling realization. Brad wasn't who he said he was. Panic gripped me as I tried to process what this meant. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed more information, a plan to get out of this situation safely. My thoughts spiraled into worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. I needed to be careful and discreet to protect myself until I figured out my next move. That night, I barely slept. I was awake as Brad slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within me. I needed to act, and quickly. I reached out to a friend who worked in law enforcement, sharing my concerns without revealing too much detail. They agreed to help, promising to look into Brad's background discreetly. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and pretense, and I had to carry on as if everything was normal. But inside, I was a mess of nerves and fear. My friend finally called with the news confirming what I had feared. Brad had a history of identity fraud, moving from place to place, latching onto people and situations where he could exploit their trust. Now, having this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. I needed to get Brad out of my life without provoking him. I carefully crafted a story about just needing my space back, hinting at personal issues that I needed to address. And to my surprise, Brad took the news without much protest. He packed up his things under the guise of moving on to new opportunities. It was such a relief to see him go, to reclaim my space and sense of security. In the weeks following Brad's departure, I was wary of everything and everyone. I changed my locks, updated my security system, and I took a break from online dating. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was to have discovered the truth before things escalated further. It's crazy how for a couple of months, I really didn't find any definitive proof. I should have just moved on, you know? But something was screaming from inside of me every single day that something was wrong. So, I guess our takeaway from this should be, trust your gut. It won't betray you. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.